Lou James Prosser Jr. was born July 9, 1899, in Prosser Hollow, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, to Lou and Annie Prosser. His father was a bituminous coal operator and a real estate dealer who moved the family to Miami in 1906, where Lou Jr. attended public schools, graduating from Miami High School in 1916, completing his formal education at the Pan American College of Commerce, also in Miami. Afterwards, he moved to Plant City, where he worked for the Seaboard Airline Railroad and gained valuable experience in freight shipping and the express business, which would eventually lead to some of his most important innovations. At the time, Plant City was the largest inland shipping point in the state, with 50 to 60 trains passing through each day. Prosser began his career in the citrus industry in 1921.
He signed on with R.W. Birch, who was a big citrus producer in this area, and that's where he got his start. And then Mr. Birch died, and my father took over the company, and that's, well, how he really got his beginning.
Within 2 years, he had expanded the operations to 5 citrus packing plants and had become the third largest independent shipper of citrus fruit in Florida. In 1928, he married Vavio Madeline Wilbur in Plant City, and they had one child, Sally Madeline Prosser, who was an honor student at Duke University. In 1950, Sally married Dr. John Verner, a medical internist at Duke University Hospital, and later a partner in the Watson Clinic in Lakeland, Florida.
At that time in Plant City, you really didn't have access much to getting credit, especially at that time when the country was going through a lot of economic stress and the farmers here could not get any extension. So there's got to be some better way that they can, in fact, get credit through a larger organization in Washington, D.C. The federal government was organizing some concept like that, and he got involved with them to build it up in Plant City so the farmers here could, in fact, get credit.
This led to the formation of the first farm production credit association in the area, the Plant City Production Credit Company, which was administered by Prosser's R.W. Birch Company and sponsored by a forerunner to the United States Farm Credit Administration. An inventor and an aggressive innovator, Prosser went on to form the Florida Mixed Car Company, which specialized in marketing mixed car lot shipments of citrus and produce on one rail car solely dedicated to the shipment of produce. By the late 20s, Prosser was averaging 1,000 carloads of citrus and produce annually. Later, when the railroads were unwilling to provide refrigerated car lot express services, Prosser was determined to change that.
He just said, let's fight this. Let's go in and make sure that the railroad is treating us so that we can, in fact, get our products to the markets in time. They disagreed with that. So he went to Washington and went to the Interstate Commerce Commission, and after 3 years of battling with them, and he financed the whole thing, and they finally agreed. And they said to the railroad said, this is what you got to do. You have to be fair, provide for them a mixed lot.
The landmark ruling resulted in increased shipments of produce from Plant City, eventually paving the way for the state's largest farmers market and for making Plant City the largest winter strawberry shipping point in the world. Areas around the farmers markets were incubators for new business, and in 1944, Prosser organized the first and only citrus canning plant in Plant City, the Citrus Products Company, providing a new market for citrus producers. He also used the byproducts through processing them in the adjacent cattle feed division and the citrus molasses division. Prosser sold the plant to what became a multi-million-dollar cannery, the J. William Horsey Company. By the 1950s, Lou Prosser owned or controlled via lease several thousand acres, with some in Pinellas, Hillsborough, Polk, and Sumter counties, which led to another innovative development in 1951, the first citrus harvesting rig. He traveled extensively and often funded trips with Dr. A.F. Camp, later of the Citrus Experimental Station, CAS, in Lake Alfred, to research citrus production practices in other countries.
He had traveled to South America and Portugal and Spain, not necessarily in that order, researching their citrus operations and how they were handling their pests, Mediterranean fruit fly, particularly in regards to Europe, and also then in Brazil. Was the beginning of the Brazilian citrus industry, and he was pretty aware that they could become a superior competitor if only they could solve their pest problems. And Florida was doing a lot of research in citrus pest management at the time.
Prosser's extensive search for knowledge about citrus resulted in several revolutionary changes in processing and marketing crops. He made a valuable contribution to the industry with the development of 2 patents which became uniformly applied throughout the state.
One of the patents was to color the oranges so that it could compete with the California variety, which was oranger, and so color added.
This color-added process became widely used within the industry due to the enhanced eye appeal of the fruit, which made it more competitive with higher-colored varieties. The second innovation pioneered by Prosser's company was the trisodium phosphate bath. Previously, it had been necessary to wrap each orange and grapefruit separately in specially treated paper to deter decay in transit and merchandising. This was eliminated by the new bath process, which significantly retarded decay, reduced the cost of packing, and led to the use of alternative types of containers.
My grandfather used to stop sometimes when he'd take me out in the car and he'd go and check out a grove, and he'd name them. He'd say, I call this is the Jamie Grove, and and Vic, this is the Vic Grove. But he'd pull out his pocket knife and just, peel an orange, and we'd sit there and stand there and eat one.
Even in his older years, Mr. Prosser read and studied everything there was to know about the industry and how it was changing. Though he had been involved since before the Great Depression, and many old growers were a tad slow to adopt certain sprays and technologies, Mr. Prosser was always looking ahead. His grandson, Ed Werner, grew up working for his grandfather and recounts this story. My grandfather introduced me to many names currently adorning your Hall of Fame's list of recipients, such as Dr. Camp, Mr. Floyd, B.H. Griffin, Tom Mack, Buster Pratt, and others. Additionally, I had a class with Dr. Pravat while at FSC, and he too mirrored comments offered by these men and others regarding my grandfather's contributions to the Florida citrus industry. The common theme I would hear from these people when they would greet my grandfather and then address me was nearly always something like, "Son, you should be very proud to be Mr. Prosser's grandson. He has done so much for this industry," etc. Frequently, I would hear how my grandfather had been instrumental in supporting Dr. Camp's efforts and what became the Lake Alfred Experiment Station before such was funded. I was told how Lou sponsored some of the travels to foreign countries by many who otherwise would not have been able to study and learn.
One time some children came to the door and said they would like to greet their father who was coming home from the service, and they only needed 50 cents more, and they had some oranges that they had taken from my dad's grove and tried to sell it to my father. And he certainly gave them the $1 or whatever it was and said, "Welcome your dad home."
Prosser was also known to quietly donate to education for numerous family and friends throughout Plant City, as well as anonymously fund area projects, and in a 1975 article discussing the growth of Plant City, recounted several accomplishments that were actually his own, but he didn't take credit for them in the article. Prosser was a charter member in the creation of the first federal savings and loan company in Plant City, which provided loans to the agricultural industry. Known as Plant City's quiet entrepreneur, Prosser was also the author of Early History of the Produce Industry in Plant City and passed away in 1996 at the age of 97.
What I admire most about my father was the way he always advised me to be big. He'd take me up on his lap when I was complaining about some little girl at school or something that had happened and that I was all upset about, and he'd say, "Oh, Sally, you must always be big." I can still hear him saying it.
A pioneer, shipper, producer, processor, researcher, and promoter of Florida's citrus industry for more than 75 years, we are proud to add Lou Prosser Jr. to the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame.